listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 533.
Hello and welcome back to another podcast in the 15-year series here on the outdoorstation.co.uk. I'm your host, Bob Cartwright, and since 2005 I've been producing podcasts and outdoor videos to inform, inspire and entertain lovers of the great outdoors and self-powered travel, making the Outdoors Station the longest running independent outdoors media service of its kind in the world. This podcast is the audio extracted from my recent live stream interview with TGO Personality of the Year 2020, Quintin Lake. In September this year, he completed his 5-year project entitled The Perimeter, where he walked 11,000 kilometres clockwise around England, Wales and Scotland, recording high-quality images of our coastline virtually every step of the way. Since his return, he has become a bit of a media celebrity, as many countries have grasped the romance and the challenge of the project. So I was very lucky he could fit me in to his ever-expanding diary. However, before I get into the interview, if this is the first time you've listened to one of my podcasts, please check out the website, theoutdoorstation.co.uk, where you will find more than 530 podcasts covering all aspects of outdoors life and self-powered travel. While you're there, please join the newsletter so I can keep you up to date with future guests and plans. Okay, everyone, silence on set. Lights, cameras, and action. Hello and good evening and welcome everyone to another live stream here on the Outdoors Station. And we're looking forward to having a really good conversation tonight. We've also got a good crowd in the room watching, best part of 30 people watching I can see on the screen, and only a few of you been brave enough to say hi. We've got a hello from Alan Wood and from Mark Jan again, and good to see you guys have joined us. Alan's got the beer and snacks poised apparently, and Mark Jan's got a nice cuppa and a apple flap, whatever that may be. Anyway, as usual, we have the lovely Rose in the chat room, who's looking after everybody.
Hi, everyone.
And she's going to be contributing and joining in with any of the conversations as we go along. So, back to tonight. Well, yes, as you may have seen from the social media, in 2016, I spoke with Quintin Lake regarding the perimeter of the UK. It was an audio podcast, and I do hope people have had time to perhaps have a listen to that. Number 410, if you're looking to find it, you'll find it quite easily actually on the Outdoor Station website. And at that stage, he was 25% of the way around the perimeter, and obviously about to go further. Now, after I spoke to him, apparently things really started to get interesting. But don't take it from me, take it from Quintin, because here he is. Welcome, Quintin. Good evening to you.
Hi, evening.
Well, nice to see you again, Quintin, and good to catch up with you once again after a long gap, 4 years, 2016. You've now completed the walk, I understand.
That's right. 3 months ago, I finished at St. Paul's,
3 months ago, and whereabouts are the pictures at the moment? So you're here, but your pictures?
I'm here. My pictures I'm editing are all the way up in Mallaig in Scotland. So I'm 186 days behind with pictures. So I've probably got another year's work to catch up. But it's been really nice in the evenings. I kind of, after I've worked in the day, I edit for a few hours in the dark and relive being outside. So it's kind of it's quite therapeutic.
And I understand you've, obviously this is one of many, many interviews that you've had since you've returned, which has been incredible.
Yes, beyond my wildest dreams. It's been about 80 since I finished 3 months ago. I kind of thought people might be interested for a few hours, but it's sort of gone around the world a bit. I've done stuff in Germany and India and Italy, and it's amazing. People are just interested in putting one foot in front of the other.
Okay, that's let's get on to the background, the actual background. Now, I'm hoping people have listened to the podcast, but if they haven't, let's just spend a few moments to backtrack right back to 2015, I guess, and just give people an idea of what the project was going to entail and how it progressed, how you actually started the project.
Well, I'd done a few river walks, which gave me the idea of combining photography with walking. And actually, it only took a couple of weeks between deciding to start and starting. The main thing was coming up with the name. And then at the beginning, I just walked a few days at a time and went home. And then as the project grew and it became more expensive and more committing to go north, the time I was away from home grew. So in North Scotland, I was away about 9 weeks at a time. And then I'd return home for normally about double that. So over the 5-year period, I was walking about a quarter of the time and I was editing a quarter of the time. And I kind of funded it by selling prints and working as a photographer. So that's how I made it work. But as you alluded to earlier, it was a completely different experience kind of moving from England to Scotland, because you had the paths were different and the amount of the duration between being able to buy food extended, and most of Scotland had no path at all. So it was a very, very different experience. I mean, if I walked from dawn to dusk, I might cover 8 kilometres in the hardest part, whereas in England, I could quite easily walk 30 or 40 kilometres if it was flat. So a completely different experience.
Sure. Well, I know that going around the south coast when I last spoke to you had been a fairly, I mean, we are talking ancient history now, 2016, pre-COVID, pre-COVID and after COVID. Pre-COVID, so there was a certain additional element to the freedom, of course, as well. So when I actually spoke to you, I think the following day you were about to head off to Cardiff. So let's talk about Wales first of all before we get into Scotland and any of the incidences or anything that may have happened to you during that time. Incidentally, I must mention that we will be talking about equipment during this interview, probably towards the end, the lightweight equipment, the actual camping gear that Quintin used, and also the camera equipment. But first of all, we'll talk about the walk and the actual experience itself.
I mean, the Wales Coast Path is fantastic. I mean, the only problem about it is that it isn't longer. I mean, I think if anyone's interested in doing a long walk in Britain, that's probably quite high in my list. It would take 2 to 3 months to walk it continuously. And so you've got these really interesting contrasts to the industrial parts, like in Port Talbot, and then these beautiful bits like the Gower Peninsula and the Lean Peninsula, which is very remote in the north. And then culturally, the north and the south is very different. So much more English speaking in the south. Kind of the architecture and the churches are different. And then when you go north, there's much more Welsh speaking. Feels kind of very different feeling. And then you've got the north, which is all the Victorian seaside towns, and then you move into Liverpool. So it was and really good for camping as well. So it felt really dramatic. You've got the thing. It was really good.
So I'm looking at the map here now. As you went around Wales, I saw you just before you went into Cardiff. So did you do the perimeter of Wales or the coast of Wales as one section, or was that a series of visits?
It was a series of visits. You know what? I can't quite remember. I think it was about 3 visits. Yeah, because it took quite a few weeks to do it. Yeah, and then I included the first person to walk the coast of Britain is John Merrill, that did it in 1975, and he included the highest peaks in England, Scotland, and Wales. So I did the same thing in kind of homage to him. And to give it an extra twist, I tried to do it from the coast to the peak and back in a day, which in the case of Snowdon, I think that was 45 kilometres. I think I started at 5 a.m. and got back at midnight. So it was a really intense, amazing experience. And it was, when you're kind of quite on level, it was really nice to get a different perspective. For a bit, yeah.
I don't think I've seen any of your photographs. I mean, I must say to viewers at the moment, you sent me probably about 100 images, which obviously is just a selection, from the edit so far and some of the prints up for sale. But I don't think I've actually recall seeing anything from a mountain or from Snowdon or Scafell.
It's on the blog. I did a whole post on each of the 3 peaks, and they're all up there at the moment.
So to
So
give people an idea, I must say to folks watching as well, if you have any specific questions, we're doing a Q&A section towards the end. Please start your comment on the chat with a capital Q, just so it's easy to spot, because we're getting quite a few comments coming in now, and that'll be great. Make it easy for us to spot the questions at the end, but we'll put them all together at the end. But we'll try and touch on a whole variety of things. So just to recap, going back to that conversation we had in 2016, you were wild camping all the way. I don't believe
you use a single campsite.
No, okay. So it was wild camping all the way.
Yeah.
Did you have any offers of accommodation at all from people that got into conversation with you?
I did. People. I mean, I had to stay in a bed every 5 or 6 days because all the kit behind me, I was self-sufficient in power for the camera and everything else for 5 days, and I'd carry 5 days of food at a time and 5 days of fuel. But then every 5th day I needed to charge everything up, so I needed to have a bed then, and I either stayed in a hostel or a B&B, or quite a lot of people put me up.
That was good, because I remember seeing on your website you had a note there saying host me for a night or whatever, and I was concerned after we spoke that you were saying that you took about 4 or 5 batteries. I think a battery lasted you 2 days. And,
That's right, yes.
I seem to remember something like on a bad day you'd be taking about 70 images, on a good day about 500. So
that's right, yes. Yeah.
When you start getting into the remote parts of Wales, or in particular Scotland, obviously that you're going to be carrying an awful lot of weight in batteries.
That's right. Actually, I found for the camera it was okay, because one battery would last a couple of days. But it was actually because I was navigating on an iPhone, and I found that took more battery power. And then I used Iridium to communicate with home, because there wasn't mobile reception for most of it. So those things took quite a lot of power as well.
And again, just to help viewers watching this who haven't heard the backstory, as it were, your equipment that you were carrying when I spoke to you, and I know things changed, the equipment you were carrying, you managed to get your base weight down to 5 kilos. So just give a rough idea of what that was for people, plus your camera equipment and obviously food and fuel.
So that's a lightweight backpack. It would be a sleeping mat. It would be a lightweight tent. It'd be a stove and fuel and 1 set of clothes. And then my camera. So that was the camping base weight. Then my camera kit was about 5 kilos, and then it was about 1 kilogram a day for food and fuel. So when I started off, I was carrying on average about 15 kilos all in, everything. But then all that gear just didn't survive when I got to Scotland. It just wore out. I've got this is Cuban fiber. It's like a high-tech material. It's very light, but it just got shredded. It just didn't last very long walking every day like that. So I kind of revamped everything and ended up with very heavy equipment in the end, which lasted the distance. And then the weight got up to 20 to 22 kilos.
Yeah, I did wonder how well it would last. As good as lightweight equipment is, it's sometimes not built for long durations of tough going, particularly sticking to the coast like you were doing. I mean,
that's right. Certainly. I obsessed about weight on my back, rather than neglecting weight that I was carrying on my own body. So I ended up I've lost about 12 kilograms of body weight, and that meant that I was fitter and stronger, and it was easier for me to carry more gear at the end. So I ended up with I've got 3 tripods there behind me, all pointing the wrong way behind me there, and I ended up carrying a bigger, heavier tripod and a drone and more imaging equipment because I got stronger and fitter. So I think I was kind of compensating, in honesty, really, for lack of fitness by obsessing on lightweight gear at the beginning. I don't really think that's the right way, but it's kind of easier to think about that when you're starting something like this.
It'll be interesting to discuss that perhaps towards the end, about how your philosophy's changed from that initial conversation that we had, because I think that's quite interesting with the experience you had. Let's just talk about the photography side of it for people who are interested from that point of view. I know we touched on it in the previous conversation, but you have a very good way of describing your approach to what you were shooting and how you approach the day, sort of much more just seeing what happened as opposed to planning to the nth degree. And I know you did a lot of planning with Google Earth, but initially, as a photographer myself with a bit of interest, I tend to overplan and calculate where the light's going to be if I'm looking for something specific. But as you were walking and obviously travelling a fair distance during the hours of the day that you could, just explain how you were approaching. Were you going abstract? Were you going detail? Your landscape? wide landscapes?
Well,
What was the way of looking at things?
I suppose you kind of create opportunities in a way. So I did plan extensively. So I would look at the satellite maps. I'd use the photographer's ephemeris, which shows the light angles on certain sites. I'd always know the tide and the moon and the sun and kind of where it would be. And for certain locations, I did try and camp to maximize the chance of getting good light. But most of the time, the better shots ended up being kind of random things that weren't in my control, whether it was a storm or a break in the weather or a special bit of light on the horizon at sea. So I kind of learnt after a couple of months of this to relax and let these precious moments come about. Because at the beginning, I'd kind of beat myself up if I didn't have a good, strong picture after 2 or 3 days. But because the project was so long, I started to realize that some days, like at the moment, I'm editing Neudart in Loch Nevis, and I've already been working on it for 5 days, editing it. And there's so many beautiful pictures there. And it's just one of these, it was a miracle. That day was just special. Whereas there are other days where really there weren't any pictures of any merit. And when you think of the kind of energy and you're putting into it, it takes quite a lot of self-control to just not let that bother you so much.
And for photographers who are doing the maths while you are talking about this now, your camera is the 5D, 6D?
So yeah, I use the 5DSR, which is this. So it's currently it's quite old now, but it's a very, very high megapixel, 51 megapixel camera.
So that's a lot of. Sorry, carry on.
So and it's also weatherproof, and I shoot in square. And the really nice thing for this project, I shoot in square because it encourages an abstract way of seeing things. And this camera, you can see the square through the viewfinder, which is a really nice feature.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
And then I use probably 80% of my pictures are with this lens, which is a 70-300 telephoto. So I like that because it compresses the landscape and makes things look quite abstract. And also practically, with all the headlands going in and out, most of the things you're looking at are really quite a long way away.
So was it the camera that decided your selection to be square, or was it a conscious decision from your point of view?
It was a conscious decision. I bought this camera after about a year of the journey. I started with a 6 Mark II Canon. That was completely my decision at the beginning because I thought it would give the project some visual unity, and because my way of seeing things is quite abstract and geometrical and calm and silent, and I prefer the way that square images look for enhancing those things. Although it does seem quite perverse to have square for seascapes because they're often horizontal. I mean, I have recently been doing a few that are horizontal, but primarily I've thought about it as square.
Oh dear. And for people watching who don't know your backstory, you are a traditional, is that the right word? Architectural photographer, is that right?
Well, yeah, I trained as an architect. I did 7 years of architecture, worked for 1 year, then became an architectural photographer. And then all the profits I earned, I would travel around the world, 70 countries, and started doing fine art photography from travel. And then that's led to this, but I still do architecture photography and this. It's kind of, they're sort of joint. They complement each other, really. I think if I did this all the time, I'd get very hairy and dirty, and I don't know.
Be a proper outdoors man. So the other thing that immediately comes to mind for people that are doing the sums mentally, then, if that's a 50 megapixel camera and you're taking some 500 pictures potentially or more a day, and you're away for several weeks at a time, what is your backup procedure and safety procedure for carrying all your files?
I don't have one. I've never, touch wood, I've never lost an image file yet, but I couldn't find a good solution. But I just have a waterproof pack here with the batteries, and then I just there aren't any in here now, but I just carry them. This is lighter than anything you can buy. I just carried about a dozen 64 gig SD cards, and they're waterproof, good ones. But I couldn't find a lightweight enough way to back it up in the field, so I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't have any problems. But as soon as I got home from each leg, I would back it up onto my system here, which is backed up 3 places and offline. And I think that the data for the whole project is about 9 terabytes.
Gosh, 9 terabytes.
Yes.
It starts to fill me with fear when I start to rely on hard drives. So, and then of course the culling process, the editing and culling process is going to be must be a really difficult decision between a handful of pictures that are sort of similar place, different angles, subtle lighting or whatever. I remember you saying in the podcast that you go through them and you shortlist them and then you delete. Do you delete permanently?
No, I don't, because I don't. No, I don't. No, I just kind of cull them out because there's two reasons. One thing, I think your taste of what's a good photo can change with time, and it's nice to be able to rewind and realize actually that was a really good picture. You might want it at a slightly different angle. And the other thing is when you're doing some printing operations, you can realize might be some tiny little bit is slightly out of focus or not perfect, and then you might have actually selected the one that wasn't perfect when you're culling it. So I think it's pretty important to keep them all.
Okay, what I'd like to do now is just go on to the actual camping experience, actually the outdoor experience, and some of the feelings it must have been to wake up in a variety of different locations and a variety of different weathers. So has it been all positive, or did you have a few sort of disappointing moments, shall we say?
Well, I mean, the biggest change for me, I mean, it was 200 days of this journey with Scotland. I mean, the absolute joy, the complete joy of being able to walk across the border and to be able to camp anywhere you like within reason. And to all of England, I had to stealth camp. So all of England, I'd pitch late, wake up early. I'd basically hide in woods. And I kind of got quite good at it. I never got kind of caught or busted, as it were. But at the same time, you do feel like a vagrant. And in Scotland, you feel like this picture on screen. That's Essex hiding in a wood. And whereas this image would be, I think that's that's Arran in the background in Scotland, and just to be able to light a fire on the beach, and to be able to camp near that, and then to be able to wave at someone the next morning, it's beautiful. But I mean there were very bad storms, as you can imagine. So I mean I did get cold and scared a few nights. Probably 4 nights in the whole journey. I'd wrapped up all my kit into a canoe bag because I was sure that the tent would get flattened during the night. I felt this is it. It's going to happen tonight. But this Terra Nova mountain marathon tent is managed to survive. It's kind of miraculous, really, because it's only a 3-season tent. But I had full, these named storms that you hear in the news, and I was out on the coast in this. So I mean, you need earplugs to be able to sleep. So this was in Kintyre in the summer, and that's Lochorn north of Knoydart in the winter. So it was important to me to walk through all the seasons. So I spaced the trips out through all seasons because I wanted the images to show the change of seasons.
And was there a stage at all where that you felt on the coast? I mean, I've done a few coastal paths, and sometimes the cliff edges get a little bit closer. They're worn away, obviously, over time. And as you were fairly remote, I suppose, most of the time, and going through a variety of seasons. I mean, that's one question I actually haven't asked you about which seasons you chose to do this in. Have you chosen to do the whole of the UK in different season, or different season, different section?
I mean, it kind of where I was exactly in terms of winter and summer was random, but it was important that I had as much time in the winter as in the summer in the whole project, which is how it worked out. In fact, most of the better pictures, I think, ended up being the worst weather in the winter, even if there was very little light. One important thing is in the winter, because it got dark so early, that I would walk about 3 or 4 hours in the dark with a head torch. So it was a kind of a strange experience, which I ended up quite enjoying, because as a photographer, that was the time of the day I could switch off and relax. But yes, obviously in the dark, in the middle of Scotland, say, you'd have to pay a lot of attention to where you were walking to keep safe.
And you took a spot system, I think, was it? You said you had a safety system.
Well, I used this, which is a Garmin InReach. So this tiny thing uses Iridium, and you can do two-way texting. And I used that with an iPhone. And I could message my wife every night, and she was my kind of safety net. So I would have an agreed time. I'd message her, and if I didn't, she would have called the Coast Guard, and that was a way we could just chat as well. And then it also has a kind of SOS function. I think it's GEOS on the side, I've fortunately never had to use it, although I nearly did once, but I never had to use it. And I think the GEOS function is supposed to be as good as Spot. But also you get verification because you can message back to the emergency services, which I would imagine is quite reassuring.
And talking about your wife and family, you had a young family, obviously, while you were doing this.
Yes.
As they've grown up over the period of doing
not
this.
Anymore, they're not. Yeah.
But I'm curious, for people who live a freelance life, how did this all work out with you leaving home for several weeks at a time, as it were? Did you manage to find a balance between work life and getting the project done so you could absorb yourself in the project?
I mean, I do get a lot of quite emotive reactions to this because some people think it's like completely self-indulgent what I'm doing, and that it's just like, leaving the wife and kids at home. How could I do that? How irresponsible. But I think it's not. I'm not doing this as a game. This is my job as a photographer. And prior to being married, I would travel for months and months and months at a time to get the images that I needed. So in a way, this was a kind of a compromise. But I found that psychologically, when I did come home, I was much more focused and on being a father and a husband. I think that hopefully made me better both ways. But it was very difficult, especially when they were younger. But now they just sort of, or daddy's going off walking, taking pictures. They sort of understand that.
But it isn't just all about taking pictures. There's a lot of planning and preparation that goes into this. So I'm sure people would be interested to know how you were calculating your food intake and how you balance the weight. Did you send packages ahead of yourself somewhere so you could pick them up from a post office? Or
I've got another prop here.
Oh, the man with the props.
So this would be a ration bag that I'd send myself. So is that in the screen there? So that's like a couple of dehydrated meals, some energy bars, porridge, fuel, and then I'd carry 5 days, and then I'd send them ahead to myself for 5 days, and my kids got really good at helping me put this together as a sort of example of getting them involved in it. But that's how I manage the food, and there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, obviously you can buy food throughout the UK, but you couldn't buy dehydrated food that was nutritious enough. I tried and failed. I mean, you needed my calorie requirements were sometimes sort of 4,000 or 5,000 calories, and in Scotland in the winter, and if the food wasn't nutritious, I was just kind of running flat. And so obviously I'd buy fresh food whenever I could, but also I was often arriving at places at really weird times of night and everything was closed. And then if I had to detour inland and waste a few hours just to buy food, the whole project sort of fell apart, because I actually I planned every single day, and every single day I had to walk because I booked a train ticket to go up and a train ticket to come back, and then I had family and client commitments when I came back. So I wasn't sort of free floating around on this. I had a rest day every now and again, which I could use if I had a problem. But I was always kind of, in a way, working to the clock to a pre-planned schedule.
Well, certainly the weather that we can see here was pretty ropey at times, and it wasn't all good fun. So, did the weather sort of turn and get more challenging as you went into Scotland, or did you have a fair share of rough weather in Wales or on the English coast?
Well, I thought I did, and then but when you're sort of veteran of Scotland, everything changes. I mean, I walked Land's End John O'Groats when I was 20. I've hiked a lot in Scotland and the Cape Wrath Trail and quite a few things up there, but somehow this was just another level, and it's just so much more extreme, everything in terms of the wind and the drama of it, that it was much harder than everything in England. Yeah, I mean, just so much more exposed to, and then when it rains, often it's for a prolonged period, and the wind is much more likely to be gale force.
Did you find that the amount of ground that you could cover? Because obviously the Welsh coast is as a path, and
yes.
A lot of the English coast has an established path or a series of paths. But when you hit Scotland, because of the right to roam, obviously things are a little bit more free for all up there. Did you find that your mileage suddenly reduced, and were you anticipating that from your research?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I thought it would get a bit slower, maybe 25% slower, but it turned out it was I was walking a third of the distance. Sometimes the rough bounds are maybe 8 to 10 kilometers walking dawn to dusk, because I needed I was carrying so much weight for that section as well. But not only were there no paths, but there's sort of micro cliffs, and you try to follow a path which aren't marked on the map because they're less than 10 meters high. So you'd sort of follow an area that you thought was a way through and find out it was a dead end. You have to turn back again, and then it was like you kept trying and then kept failing. So it was a difficult section.
Yeah, Scotland can be like that, and then it can surprise you with a most rewarding experience, certainly. Scotland also has another treat up its sleeve as well, and I can see from this video that you enjoyed it in great detail.
Oh yes, the wonderful midges. Yeah, so I got quite. So I think smidge is brilliant, and then I treated my clothes in permethrin, and I got kind of used to it. The problem I found was cooking, so I'd wear a head net and I'd sometimes have mitts on so I could cook. But then the problem was sort of eating. So you've got this food in front of you, and then how do you get the food into your mouth? So you sort of take a spoon, lift up the head net, take a mouthful, then close it down, and you sort of squish them all on your face, and then you'd swallow the food. So it was, it was sometimes just, it's beggars belief. But they don't like the wind, so when it was windy, it was fine.
And what about the actual getting into the camera? Surely when you were taking pictures with these midges around, you had to stand still.
Yes,
you had to stand still for a second.
No, you're right. When I did a lens change, I soon learned never to do that. It's kind of stupid in retrospect. But yeah, I did lens changes sometimes, and it was full of midges. Yeah, so I'd have to clean it afterwards. I think I had one stuck on the mirror for a few weeks before I realised it.
Well, we're getting quite a few questions coming through, which we'll go through and answer in more detail, some of which we've already touched on, but we'll touch on in detail towards the end. Now, there has one coming from Alan regarding injuries, which is something I did want to ask you. You obviously had a few problems in the entire journey. Would you like to just sort of give us an idea of what you had to cope with?
Well, the worst injury was a split tendon. I had a longitudinal split in the tendon on top of my foot, coming from North Wales into Liverpool, and I'm still not quite sure what that was. I think it was because I'd used the 7 pairs of shoes behind me there that I've worn out on the trip. I started off wearing lightweight fell running shoes, and then I moved to backpacking boots later. But by the time I got to North Wales, I was kind of quite fit from Snowdon and all the difficult terrain. I was doing huge distances, but coming into Liverpool, Merseyside, it was all concrete, very flat. And I think I got a repetitive strain injury that split the tendon. So that was really frustrating because it hurts, and I had to take 2 months off wearing a one of those physio boots and do lots of physio. And then afterwards, all my fitness had dropped. And then later in Scotland, I had shin splints, and I had a problem with a tick bite getting infected and possible Lyme disease. And then obviously it's just the weather, dealing with hypothermia. But those were the 2 main injuries that I had.
Gosh, it's been a labour of love then. You really did put yourself through it after I spoke to you last time.
Yeah, it was really hard. So, to have the split tendon, and then it was really only half a year later to then have the shin splints. I thought, this is crazy. So actually, my whole philosophy changed really. And that's when I used heavy boots, and I used trekking poles a lot more. And, I took my fitness a lot more seriously, because because doing this is quite strange, because it's sort of, because you're intensely working physically, and then you come home and you're intensely staring at a screen, which obviously isn't sustainable. So I did this hike when I got home 3 times a week with all photography books in my backpack to keep the same kind of strength going when I got home.
And the weather wasn't always kind to you, as we can see from this video clip. Was that the night that you packed everything in bags ready to do a runner?
Oh no, this was a modest night. I think it's kind of like, when you're really scared, you don't film. Well, I don't anyway. It gets to a level where you're too scared to get the camera out. This was annoyingly loud, but there were times when it was like right pushed onto my face, and I was sure the pole would snap. But yeah, there was quite a lot of this in Scotland, and this is, I'm kind of conscious of how to pitch in the lee of shelter where possible, to use the maximum natural shelter, but it still was impossible in times.
And I think I touched on this last conversation, but I'd be interested to hear your updated reply to it. When you're out walking, or when I'm out walking and I take a camera, there are times where
Yeah.
I just want to stop and absorb the view. And as much
Yes.
it might make a nice picture, I get absorbed in the view in the moment and watching the wildlife or whatever it may be. How did you discipline yourself to keep going? And we must mention the rules as well. I don't think we mentioned the rules, because you had a set rules that you had to adhere to in this.
But yeah, these are just my own rules. So I didn't take any transport. So I didn't take any ferries or any boats. So all the so for example, Falmouth Harbour, which you can cross 10 minutes in a ferry, that was a 4-day trip around all inland in all the rivers. And there's quite a lot of huge detours in Scotland down all the sea locks.
And the decision not to sit and absorb the view, did you really have to discipline yourself on that score?
Yeah, because people talk a lot about, when I hear people talking about that, if you're hiding behind the camera, you're not conscious of what you're looking at, and that's a bad thing. But I've personally never found that. I found that concentrating on seeing by looking through a camera is one of the ways to be most conscious and present in the moment. So I never felt I was sort of missing being there by taking pictures. If anything, it was enhancing it, especially at dawn or dusk, where you're waiting behind the tripod for the perfect light. It's one of the most powerfully beautiful experiences, whatever your ambitions in photography are, because you really slow down, and it's kind of meditative because you're waiting that 20-30 minutes for the perfect light to come about. So I never felt that the camera was getting in the way of my experience at all.
And you mentioned the tripod then. When I last spoke to you, you decided not to take a tripod. So what changed? Yeah. What was it, the weather?
Yeah, it was a lot of the weather. I mean, the days were much shorter at the time. I was in Scotland a lot, and by having a tripod, you just maximize the time you can work quite a lot. I'm not a photographer that believes you need a tripod in good light, but in poor light, you do need it. And I found that I'd get an extra hour in the dawn and the dusk where I could take good pictures. And also I could do some night photography or things under moonlight. And then there were quite a few things maybe that were interior as well. So the tripod behind me. So I started off with this tiny guy, which is very light. But the problem is it's not really high enough to get over grass. So it's next to useless really for outdoor photography. And then I went to this guy that was about half a kilogram carbon fiber, and it was pretty good, but it didn't really handle the wind in Scotland very well. And then I ended up using this, which is a Jitso Traveller. So it's about a kilogram and a half, which is still quite lightweight by most people's standards, but that's what I used most of the time. And to kind of use it as low as possible. So you close all the sections down, and then you sit in front of it very short on the ground, and then that makes it much more stable, even with a long lens. So that's how I use tripods.
And did you said obviously the hour it gained at each end of the day, but did you find during the rest of the day you using the tripod, or did you, when the light was better, you were happy just to continue handheld?
No, I didn't use it for the daytime, but I did get much more into video during this project, something I'd not had much experience of. So I did a lot more time lapses and more considered. I often locked just my phone off on the tripod and clamped it down to take time lapses or videos, because I felt that the stills didn't convey everything. So I used videos, and I wrote a diary about lots of the human encounters because the pictures weren't really conveying that.
Right. Well, we're getting some great questions coming in, so do keep them coming, folks. So just start it with a capital Q. We'll probably have the Q&A slightly earlier because we've got so many questions, which is really good. But let's just touch on one or two little stories within the story, as it were. The first one I think is quite interesting, where you found yourself surrounded by security guards.
Yeah, so this was Teesside, and I was trying to photograph the sort of the inspiration for the start of Blade Runner with all the power stations and the flare stacks, and I arrived at night, and I wasn't being that stealthy, but I needed to be in this position. And then I was woken up in the morning by these armed nuclear police for the power station. I didn't know that they would extend quite a long way out, and they were super friendly after they realized that what I was doing, and they posed for this picture. but yeah, so that there's a one way to get a wake up call is to camp next to a nuclear power station. I don't think I'll be doing that again.
Although, yeah, it's certainly a bit of a fresh morning start. Did they offer you a cup of coffee or anything, or just came hammering on the door?
Actually, they offered me a lift because they were patrolling obviously all the time. So they kept driving past me, and they always had a good bit of banter each time they passed me. So that they offered me a lift and they offered me help, but I think it was banter really because they knew I wouldn't take it.
And talking about being offered things, again, we touched on in the podcast, but I'd be interested to see how it changed or didn't change after Cardiff. Was the situation about getting water? Because that's obviously the biggest problem to get fresh water on the coast. How did things change for you on that score?
Well, when Scotland became really easy because so this is a water bag with a soya filter. So that's how I purify water in Scotland, because I was only worried about kind of animal muck and things like that in the water. And you can find a stream sort of every few meters in most of the country in Scotland. So I was carrying, ironically, a lot less weight because there were streams everywhere. Whereas England was a massive problem because the streams were lots of agricultural runoff and the filters can't get rid of the chemicals, the fertilizer. So ironically, the most water I carried was in Essex because, for 2 days, I'd be carrying sort of 6 or 7 litres of water because I was away from any shops. And the public toilets didn't have fresh water. They have those machines with the buttons, these silly little problems. So the water was a problem. But sometimes I did knock on doors and get help.
And I understand that a pasty was almost the beginning of your demise. Do tell us the story about the dangerous pasty.
The pasty? Sorry.
At Bridlington.
Oh, yes. So this was Bridlington. So this is the Holderness coast, which is the fastest eroding coast in Europe. So this road's about 5 meters per year, and the roads just run off this. I didn't know any of this at all. And in the distance of this photograph, I'd been in Bridlington. There'd been a bad storm, and I had bought a pasty, and I was walking on this beach without caring the world. And my plan was, when it got dark, I was going to go up what I assumed would be an easy path that was marked on the map from the roads that ran off this cliff. But that wasn't the case. And the sea kept coming higher and higher until I was jogging and then until I was running. And I tried to climb up these cliffs, and they're wet clay, like wet concrete. So I kept thinking that it was going to collapse on me, and I was properly panicked. And I was, I had my finger on I was going to call the Coast Guard, and then at the very last minute, and this is all at night with a head torch, properly terrifying. And then I found an area a bit like the foreground of this picture where there was some clods of earth that was a bit drier, and I managed to scramble up and collapse on the top, full of adrenaline, absolutely terrified. So that just shows you, because I'd really thought that this was Yorkshire. I'd been going for 4 years. I felt, I wouldn't say complacent, but I felt the hardest bit was behind me. And then I got this big surprise because I didn't know about this unique terrain. And talking to people afterwards, this is quite a common problem in Holderness, that the Coast Guard's often called out with this problem people get, because there's no way up for about 8 kilometres along here. There's no way up at all.
Wow. Very close run thing. As you say, just weren't paying attention at that moment.
Yeah.
And in the dark as well, even more terrifying because you couldn't see if there was an escape plan.
That's right, yeah. Well, you could see, because the map has all these paths, and you just assume, I assumed, there'd be a way from the road. But then when you get to the top, just the tarmac ends and it just falls off the cliff because it's, the police have got a cordon and they move this concrete block back every few meters every year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's full of villages there that are gone. So
yes.
People that live there that have their grandparents lived in villages which are under the sea. So it's kind of a fascinating thing.
Wow. And finally, I think you were a bit apprehensive when crossing the Broome Way. We've got some video here.
Oh, this is kind of fascinating. So the Broome Way is allegedly Britain's most dangerous footpath, although it looks like something you do on a day out, doesn't it, really? But it's 8 kilometres, and it's sinking sand on one side and unexploded ordnance on the other. And you have to judge the tide just right with the air pressure and the wind. Otherwise, the tide could sweep you away. It's allegedly killed over 100 people. And this leads to Foulness Island, which is like a Ministry of Defence island. And the only way you can gain access to it is via this footpath. It's this weird sort of loophole, but then it's almost impossible to walk onto it and back 2 different tides, both on the Broomway. And no one really does it without a guide. And I probably spent more time researching how to do this than any other thing on the whole project. I talked to countless people that done it, and then there was a scientist on Twitter who'd done it, and he had this really analytical route plan, and he showed me his GPS tracks, and he really helped me. And then a meteorologist reassured me that the day I'd chosen to do it, the weather would be correct. So I ended up walking in the morning on one tide, then walking around the island, and then waiting and walking back on another tide. But as soon as I arrived on the island, I was intercepted by the military, who check what you're doing, and you feel watched every second of the way around there. But I did it.
Wow. Oh, you certainly had a few moments in this, didn't you?
Yeah.
We've got some great questions. I'm going to come on to the questions shortly, and I just want to run the last clip that I've got here, which was basically your last night in London prior to finishing, obviously. And there's audio on that'll just cut us out for a few moments while we hear your last words, as it were.
Well, this is my last night out camping. The lights over there are a London gateway. I've just been taking some long exposure pictures up here, and down here is my dinner I'm about to cook up. There's like dehydrated food, and I'm about to boil some water. I'm pretty hungry and tired, so I'm going to get on and do that.
And that was your final resting place.
That was my final resting place. Yeah, that was last night of camping. Yeah, but actually, this brings up one of the joys of this project. So I only found out about this hidden beach, but by someone on Twitter who told me, oh, you've got to go here. And all the way through this journey, it's been people giving me advice saying, oh, you've got to go here, you've got to go there, and then people sharing their stories of their grandmother was married here, or there's this amazing bit of history. So as I went on the journey, I drew on all these ideas, which was amazing. So at the end, I was getting a lot more kind of help with locations, I guess, just through doing a public project, whereas at the beginning I was just working alone.
And did you find that your audience, your social media audience and your project audience, as it were, grew and were supporting you and have continued to support you now after the finish of the event?
Well, there's a few people that supported me right from the beginning who have a very special place in my heart. But I mean, most of the following has actually come really in the last sort of 6 months, I think, kind of because it probably looks like I'm actually going to be able to finish it. It's I mean, as a photographer, you create work because you want people to see it, even though it's a very solitary pursuit. So having an audience is very important.
Great. Well, let's come on to some Q&A if you're okay for a bit of time to answer some of these. And I'll just go through them. We touched on this earlier on, but the Flying Sprout wants to know what weight you were carrying.
So at the end, it was on average, it's about 20 to 22 kilograms. That included food and water.
Oh, in actual fact, yeah, you said you were going to mention what you changed out of the lightweight kit into the heavier weight kit. Is this a good time to mention that now?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the heavy boots in the background there, that's I used for kind of 4-season Scottish winter mountaineering boots in the end, whereas at the beginning I wore kind of fell running shoes like this with a flat, worn-out sole. So that was a big change. Then these lightweight trekking poles, I broke a few of these falling over at night. So if you're walking at night, you really have to use them not to trip over. And then I ended up with sort of alpine style, much thicker, stronger ones. So that was a big change. And then kind of much thicker jackets, whereas at the beginning I had lightweight jackets. I found that they'd wear out on the shoulders after just a couple of months, and they wouldn't be waterproof anymore. So those are the changes in gear. But obviously that all weighs quite a lot more. I used a more insulating, thicker sleeping mat. I think that was my concession. And I used a pillow. I think that's my concession to middle age. I used to just put my clothes in a stuff sack, and now I have an inflatable pillow, which I love.
And the rest of the lightweight equipment, the tent, well, I saw you got a jet boil there. I see you replaced the jet boil, but you're still stuck with the jet boil. Everything else that you were using, you managed okay? The rucksack?
Yeah, I mean, I love the jet boil. I think it's a bit misunderstood because it's relatively heavy thing by lightweight backpacking standards. But the thing is, it only uses 5 grams of fuel to boil half a litre. So you can carry so much less fuel. And if you're not an integrated canister stove like this, it uses about 8 to 10 grams or more when it's windy. So I find that, and then the fact you can just guarantee that it's going to boil quickly. I find in the winter the morale boost of hot water quickly was really important, and this does it in two minutes. And that, whether it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes, maybe doesn't matter if you're with your mates on a beach. But I found it, for me in the winter, it made a big difference in getting too cold or not.
Okay, back to some questions then. Dave Fowler, what was Quintin's experience of wild camping the English sections of the coast?
That's a really good question. Well, it is really difficult because you have to stealth camp for most of the time. And so that just takes quite a bit more planning. Some people do it, but I never felt that comfortable being really visible most of the time. So if I found a spot that was nice, I wouldn't put the tent up. I'd stop, I'd have dinner, I'd sort of prepare myself, and then as it got dark, I'd put the tent up, and then I never really ran into any trouble that way. Personally, I think it should be the same system as in Scotland, with responsible camping being allowed. I mean, the wilder bits of Wales or Cornwall, you're pretty hidden away, so that's a lot easier. But the flatter, exposed parts, where maybe they're more affluent, parts of Essex, parts of Suffolk, I would say those were the hardest bits to camp, because you're pretty much in someone's garden.
Lovely. Okay. Moving on to Russell Morehouse. Russell Morehouse. Who to and how do you sell your photographs? So,
well, it's through sort of social media campaigning, I guess, and through my blog. So I sell it on my website, theperimeter.uk. And there's a for sale section, and people buy them that way. So I think if people discover the project and get interested in it, and the prints are quite beautiful, and often when people have them in their house, one of their friends might see it and buy it. So it's to anyone that's interested.
Yeah, you mentioned to me yesterday the fact that you've following all your media exposure, because you've become a superstar overnight. You're actually getting a lot of inquiries from overseas about people that wanted to know if you went to any specific areas, which I thought was quite interesting.
That's right. I mean, I sent 3 to Germany yesterday, and it's really, there's always a beautiful story. People have a connection with a place or a thing, or it could be that people feel an emotional connection with the image. But I mean, my pictures are quite expensive, and they're a limited edition, and when the editions run out, they've run out. So that's what works for me. I can't say it's easy, but it seems the best strategy for me.
Lovely one from Lydia Beaumont. Have you met or spoken to John Moe and exchanged reflections on the roots of the 70s versus now?
I would love to. I mean, I've got a signed copy of his book, Turn Right at Land's End. That was his account of the story, and I'd love to. I mean, he's always been a big hero of mine. But no, I haven't.
Alex Roddy, who is a fellow photographer and writer as well.
Hi, Alex.
How did you find the power management of the camera, phone, etc. in the cold conditions? Were there any significant challenges, particularly as you got to Scotland, I guess?
Good question. Well, the 5DSR, I mean, the lithium batteries, they do lose charge much quicker in the winter. But I found I would keep the spares in my chest pocket, and I'd swap them out if necessary. But I wasn't like sort of like a really harsh winter for days on end. So I kind of got off lightly. But I'd say it probably made my power, the batteries lasted about half as long. But I was prepared for that.
And you did touch on this slightly earlier on from Alan. I believe you had some injuries. Can you tell us how you managed them, and if there were any lasting effects from having walked so far?
I'm not sure if it's lasting effects or getting older. I mean, overall, I'm healthier now than when I started. And but I mean, I managed the injuries by using trekking poles more than I did at the beginning. And I did all the physio. I do stretching much more, kind of morning and night when I'm hiking. And I do have a few problems with my back and my knees, but I'm finding I'm stretching more. I don't think I have, but we'll see. I do, yeah.
Another one from Dave, actually, quite an interesting one. Did the planning stages get any easier Anything you've learned from later stages that you wish you'd known earlier on or thought about, I guess?
I did. It counterintuitively, it became easier to be more self-sufficient. So at the beginning, I'd sort of go, oh, I can get away with just 2 days' food. Then I'll buy food in this shop, and then I'll get water here. But actually, things didn't work, and I'd get stuck out. So later on, I just planned to be completely self-sufficient the whole time. And then if something good happened, like I happened to be somewhere where there was food, then I could make use of that opportunity. And that actually made it all a lot less stressful. It's a lot less stressful not to have to rely on water to carry the water filter and things like that.
Hobbyist software, I think we touched on this earlier on, which was the scenario that you nearly had to use the SOS, but I guess that was the climbing the muddy cliffs.
Climbing the mud cliffs in Holderness, yeah.
Yeah. Martha Wheaton has joined us again, which is good to see you again, Martha. How did you just deal with hypothermia?
Well, I had a wet set of clothes and a dry set of clothes, and I never, ever, ever swapped them, mixed them up. So I'd walk all day in wet clothes and often pour water out of my boots at night in Scotland in the winter, and then you'd peel off the wet clothes, and then you'd put on the dry clothes inside the tent, and you'd sleep in those, and you'd never, ever, ever swap them around. So if I felt that I was succumbing or I wasn't coping, I wasn't generating enough energy by walking, and it only happened a few times, I would stop and put the tent up and get in the sleeping bag. But I didn't fall into the trap, I think, of putting lots of wet clothes on, and then you end up with nothing dry to insulate you.
Yeah, definitely.
And by having lots of hot drinks to warm up inside.
And talking of which, Mark Jan, nice to see you again, Mark. Thanks for joining us. What brand of food did you use? Did your taste change in the packet food that you took with you, the commercial food?
But I started spending money on it because you have to get good stuff. I use fire pot meals that I think are brilliant. Really, I look forward to them every day. Dehydrated, I use one good quality dehydrated meal a day. The kind of high calorie ones, which are 800 calories, the large size. I used tent meals for porridge in the morning, and then other things was like oatcakes and tuna and lots of protein, beef jerky, things like you can buy from the supermarket. So yeah, I did change. I had a lot less sugar, and I just ate a lot less junk food really at the end than at the beginning.
Interesting one from Dave. Did any of your fans join you on sections who are following you on social media? Did they find you as such?
Yeah, I did have some lovely encounters bumping into people, or people bought me a coffee or a scone or had a chat, and I really welcomed that. But I didn't really walk with anyone. I mean, the thing about what I'm doing is that you have to concentrate the whole time. And even if you walk for 3 hours, if I'm walking with a friend, I want to talk to them. And if you're talking, you can't be working as a photographer. So I didn't really walk with anyone very much.
Dave Fowler again, I know there's an answer to this one coming. Is there an exhibition planned for 2021? Beautiful work, I'd like to see it. And of course, a book as well.
Well, I deeply hope so. But I mean, COVID's kind of put paid to any exhibition ideas. I mean, as a photographer, putting an exhibition is a really brilliant way to lose money because you have to print loads of massive prints. And if they're not going to sell, you're just going to go bankrupt. So I really hope so. But it's got to work for me financially, and at the moment nothing has presented itself which would.
Have you added up, just on the back of a bank packet as it were, the cost of the food, the amount of food that you purchased for this?
I haven't calculated the food. I mean, the biggest expense was this train tickets.
Oh my goodness me!
I don't have a car, so everything was public transport, and that was thousands. I think it was 3,500. So, and then accommodation when I needed it, that was expensive. I haven't added up the food yet. No.
Sorry, I'll go back to the questions. One from a hobbyist again. Did you ever get completely lost, for example, leaving St Ives and getting turned around and ending back there several hours later?
Yeah, so this guy is a good friend of mine, Rob, and we walked the southwest coast path together after our GCSEs, and we carried heavy tinned food, and we just didn't know what we were doing at all. And yeah, we went to St Ives. We actually got lost in the mist. I think we turned around and ended up back where we started without realizing it. No, I think I learned my lesson from that experience. It's a lot easier with GPS.
Yes, indeed. Lovely question here from Joseph Proskauer. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Hi,
From
Joseph.
the
Joseph,
perimeter.
this is someone that put me up in Scotland.
Oh, isn't it? Oh, excellent. So what sense do you have now of Britain, having seen the coastline the way you have?
I think that it's a constellation of clans, of people that love their little patch, and that's really how they see it. I certainly don't see it as Britain anymore. I don't even really see it as England, Wales, and Scotland, although I see that bigger. But it's more, I think, of people from a particular area, whether it's Knoydart or the Leon Peninsula or Cumbrian coast. People's perspective and experience seems to be very local. I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Well, I think we've touched on most of the questions there that everybody wanted to know a bit more detail. Of course, you can follow Quintin in a whole variety of places, and I suggest you do so. He naturally is on all the important social media ones, and he will gladly take orders on his website. You can follow us as well at the various Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on the website as well. And if you can, do remember to join our newsletter. It's an easy way for me to get in contact with you and tell you what's coming next. And of course, if you do enjoy the podcast, there's over 530 podcasts there now to listen on a whole variety of places. So I do hope that you explore that library that's taken me 15 years to put together. I just thought there's one little gathering of images here that I've taken the liberty of doing for you, and just putting a little bit to music to see if it brings back some moments for you and for everybody to enjoy it. So we'll come back just after this. Well, I don't know if that brought back a few memories for you, but I thought
Lovely.
It was quite nice.
Good to see my steaming foot in there. No, it looks great.
It's the most famous steaming foot in TV history, I think. One question I did forget to ask, actually, and that's just reminded me seeing that clip, was you obviously took a drone towards the end of the trip, or from Scotland onwards, I understand. Was it worth it? Did you find it to be an inconvenience with the batteries, the technology? What's your thoughts?
I mean, I found it was too windy to fly it in any 4 days. There was only one day that I could fly it because it was windy too much of the time. And in England, there's so many problems. You can't fly over National Trust buildings, places that I was hardly getting any use from it. But certainly, I mean, in Scotland, it is good. And the few bits of footage I got were quite compelling, but it was carrying a dead weight for, I can show you, it's sort of, so it was a Mavic Air, which is like kind of that sort of size. But I found that one of these batteries, which are heavy, they're like 150 grams, that would really only give one flight, really. So I carried 4, and then I felt that I could get 4 bits of footage. But it was always a struggle with the wind, especially by the coast. So overall, I would say it was worth it, but only if you were doing a project like this, I would say.
Well, Quintin, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. We've had some wonderful questions in from everybody. Thank you, the audience, for joining in and watching and asking those questions. I hope you found it interesting and entertaining. As I say, Quintin is more than happy to sell you any of the images that he has on his website, which I'm sure you can find by going to the web address that we've just posted. There'll be links, of course, in the show notes and various things attached. Do, if you can, have a look at our back catalogue of podcasts and obviously videos as well. We're trying to do videos on live streams on a regular basis to keep people informed during these darker months. So all I can say is thank you very much indeed for your time, Quintin. And
Thanks, Bob.
I do hope
Pleasure.
We will speak again when you've got the next project underway, which I'm sure will be equally exciting.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Take care.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.